We are going to be talking about right away the human body organization, that is to say, complexities and other cavities. So, you are much aware that when we talk about the presentation of human body organization, that is to say, someone may say from cellular level to organ level, and it is a very important item to learn, most especially when we are talking about anatomy and physiology series. So today we are going to straight away move to the presentation, and then we can enjoy how it moves. So number one is to talk about the levels of structural complexity. That is to say that the human body is organized in a certain hierarchy, as we are going to see. And for example, is to say that each level builds upon the previous one as we increase the complexity. Of course, it can also mean increasing in size. It's very important to talk about that. When we talk about complexity, then size can be talked about, but also uh, the amount of energy used to build from one level to another is also increased. But then it is very important that once we understand the structure or this structural arrangement or organization, it is essential for us to understand how chemical imbalances can ultimately manifest, most especially in the whole body disease. So next is talk about this organization, and I want us to use this illustration greatly to understand the impact of this illustration. So number one is to talk about it by saying that right away the human life begins with an atom. There are many theories that talk about the origin of the human life. If you think about those that are talked about in biology or higher school sciences, but then atoms build to molecules, and variety of molecules can build a cell. So a cell, for example, eukaryotic cells which have membrane-bound organelles, it is very important to see that or to understand or analyze that these cells, when they do unite, they form what we call a tissue. And there are several tissues can build to form an organ. A good example I put like the stomach there are muscular tissues, there are mucous membranes or membranous tissues, which are there, among others. And then after that, we form an organ system. For example, that is a gastrointestinal tract. And then after that, we have a few full human beings. So it is very important to analyze the steps that are undertaken during the formation of an organism. In our next classes, we shall be talking about like things like embryology. We see how the development that happens actually within the uteri or intrauterine life when, for example, in human being after fertilization from a single cell to build an entire organism. So let's look at from simplest to most complex. At the chemical level, we are saying this is the absolute foundation, and it begins with atoms. For example, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. They combine to form molecules like a water molecule, which is made up of hydrogen and oxygen. Talk about the protein molecules. Then talk about later building, forming like, for example, so a DNA, which is the genetic material. Deoxyribonucleic acid. So after that, we have the cellular level, and they are saying molecules associate form cells, and the basic structure and functional units of any living organism. And I think the cells contain, of course, specialized internal structures called organelles, and I talked about them as membrane-bound organelles. In our next series also, we shall talk about a human cell, and we analyze. For example, we have put for you one structure, as an example, which is mitochondria, which is known as the powerhouse of the cell, where energy production happens in form of adenosine triphosphate, which we call ATP. So the tissue level, we say a group of similar cells along with the surrounding material they secrete that work together to perform specific tasks or what we call shared function. So later we shall talk about the types of tissues, but primarily 4 types of tissues. We have the epithelial tissues, we have connective tissues, muscular tissues, we also have the nervous tissue. So the tissues come from the organization of the cells, and when they organize, of course, they form tissues which perform shared functions or specific shared functions. After that, we talk about the organ level. In this case, we are saying at the organ level composed of 2 or more different tissues, types which are joined together to perform what we call highly specific functions. And organs, of course, have recognizable shapes, and examples, of course, we shall talk about, like the stomach has epithelial tissue lining, we have smooth muscles for churning, but also we have the nervous tissue for signaling, and then connective tissue for holding them together. So you will in your time think about or look about different organs and look at the types of tissues which are found there and the role they do perform in order to call it an organ. Then after that, we have organ system level. And this one looks at a group of related organs that cooperate to achieve a common or broad physiological purpose. Of course, different organs, they are the ones that group together to form a system. For example, if you talk about the digestive system, it is comprised right off from the mouth up to the anus. It has the specific organs that interface with the food. Also, it has accessory organs or structures like the pancreas and gallbladder plus the liver, which do not directly interface with the food, but for them, their secretions help in the process of digestion or help the digestive system to perform its tasks. Then organism level, we have, this is the highest level of organization, and all organ systems work together in harmony to keep a single individual alive. So, or in balance in a process we may say maybe homeostasis, keep it in check and alive as well. So, for example, we shall go ahead now and talk about the 11 organ systems, which are very important in maintaining what we may call a life of a human being. So we shall just be a little bit quick on this, shall not take much time. The table is organized in a way that can help you to learn and appreciate more in your time. And this one is organized in a way that, for example, if we are to talk about the integumentary system, we have the primary organs as the hair, nail, skin, sweat glands, and of course, they help in performing the role of protection, temperature regulation, as well as among others. Then we have the skeletal, where we have the bones, cartilages, joints. Saying these are helpful in structural support, organ protection. They give a structure for the body, areas of attachment. When we talk about organ protection, think of the rib cage, which protects the heart and lungs, among others. Also, the vertebral column, which protects the spinal cord. So the other one, we have muscular system, and here we have the skeletal muscles, important mostly in movement, posture, maintenance, heat generation, as well as among others. So the next we have nervous system, which is very important, that has, of course, the nervous system, it is divided into primary and the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. Beg your pardon on that. and is the central nervous system made up of the brain and spinal cord. So when we talk about the, the nervous system, of course, it is a system that is important in coordination. For now, that's what I can say without going too complexities, but is a system for coordination. Okay, next is to talk about the other systems, and the other systems we have endocrine. This is very important because the endocrine system is also important in coordination. Actually, the nervous system and endocrine system, they're important in coordination, and some point is called neuroendocrine system. So it has glands, of course. When we talk about glands, you remember we have endocrine and exocrine. Exocrine, they are duct glands whose secretions do not mix with blood, and they are powered out in the body's cavities, lumens, or even the external surface, like sweat glands and the sebaceous glands and many others. But for endocrine glands, these ones secrete hormones, and these hormones help in what we do, may call chemotaxis, maybe helping in coordination. And the glands are very many, right off from the master gland, then thyroid, pancreas, among others, which release hormones that regulate different activities. Example, growth, metabolism, reproduction, among others. Then we have cardiovascular system. Of course, this one comprises of the heart, blood vessels, among others. So this is very important that, of course, cardiovascular has a pumping organ, which is the heart, that pumps blood, which moves through the blood vessels to deliver gases of exchange. Those are oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients, and also remove waste materials. The other one is about lymphatic system, of which we have put stroke immune. It has the primary and secondary lymphoid organs, which are important in maintaining the body immunity. Then we have respiratory system. Of course, it has the key organs, which are known as the lungs. They are important in gaseous exchange, and it's very, very important to note that under respiratory system, we can talk about the upper and lower respiratory tract or system, depending on the divisions, and then the roles are different. Digestive system, we had already talked about it. It has organs that help in the process of ingestion, digestion, and also excretion, and it's very important in breaking down or taking in food, break it down, absorption, and also eliminate the one which is not digested. Urinary system, important in removing what we may call waste materials in a process of urine formation, and also important for water and electrolyte balance. Of course, pH balance or pH buffer system in the kidney is very, very important. Reproduction, we have the male and female reproductive system, but their role is very important in production of offsprings, sexual pressure, among others. So let's talk about body cavities. Now, when we talk about body cavities, we are looking at the spaces or fluid-filled spaces that help, most especially in protecting what we may call internal organs. So these cavities protect organs from physical shock and allow them to change their shape, expand without rubbing against the neighboring tissues. And the body is divided into major subdivisions. We have the dorsal cavity, which is the posterior, and the ventral cavity, which is the anterior. And I'm going to show you in this diagram. So if you take some of your time and analyze this, we can talk about the cranial cavity. This is very important because it houses the brain. And then we can also talk about the vertebral canal. Of course, as you can see, it has the spinal cord, that forms like a posterior cavities. Then you have the pleural cavity, of course, which has protects the lungs. Pericardial cavity is the one which protects the heart. Then we have the abdominal cavity, which has the variety of organs, intestines, they are there, pancreas, their stomach, among others. Then pelvic cavity majorly houses the reproductive organs, the rectum, among others. Okay, so next let's look at these cavities briefly. The dorsal body cavities, the posterior, I've talked about them, the cranial, which houses the brain, and then the vertebral cavity, which runs down and crosses the spinal cord. Then we talked about the ventral body cavities, which actually the anterior ones. And it is very important to note that part of the anterior body cavities, we have the diaphragm, I mean the thoracic cavity, which has the diaphragm. And when you look at it, we are saying it is much larger than the dorsal cavity and houses these visceral organs. So it is split. We have the other one, dome shape, which has the diaphragm, which makes the roof of actually the abdominal cavity. It makes the base of the thoracic cavity, but also the roof of the abdominal cavity. So thoracic cavity, it is superior to diaphragm, and we're saying protected by the ribs and chest muscles, further subdivided into pleura, that's the right and left, which houses the lungs, and have mediastinum, which is a space in between the lungs and contains esophagus, trachea, and thymus. So pericardial cavity, of course, like I said, the pericardium is that layer that houses the heart or encircles the heart. Of course, it has, we shall talk about them ahead, the pleura and mediastinum. They have parietal and visceral layers. The parietal is the external and the visceral is the internal. In between, they have a fluid we call the visceral fluid. So abdominal pelvic cavity is the inferior to the diaphragm, technically one continuous cavity, but functionally is split into two. So the abdominal cavity houses the stomach, the liver, the gallbladder, the spleen, the pancreas, the kidneys, among others. However, the pelvic cavity, like I said, we have the urinary bladder, the reproductive organs, the rectum. So let's remind ourselves of these key concepts. You're saying the walls of the ventral cavity and the outer surface of the organs are covered by thin double layer, and the membrane is called serous membrane or serosa. So the parietal is the one that lines the cavity walls externally, and the visceral clings tightly to the outside of the organs they do protect. For example, the visceral can lean continuous with the heart or the lungs. So when you look at the microscopic space between the two layers is usually fluid filled with what we call serous fluid that helps in lubricating or preventing what we call friction, so that these organs do not rub against one another. And also it helps them to expand, inflation and deflation. So around the lungs, we have the pleura, and around the heart, we have the pericardium. But also around the abdominal organs, we have the peritoneum. So you have to know there are triple P that surrounds the visceral organs, pleura, pericardium, and then peritoneum. I want to thank you for the time you have spent here. And for case of your comments and questions, you will type them within the chat or comment section. Let me hear your reaction about the presentation. Thank you for the great work.